Welcome everyone for joining me and Will are discussing our various nerd topics. What's the word like the drugs you use to make yourself smarter?
Yeah, cognitive enhancers,
That's a better one. Yeah,
right? For duress.
for Tourette's, I've got my as a white monster. I've got my white monster. So
Yeah.
um, we're probably gonna just chat here for the next probably three to
Yeah,
four
let's give it like
minutes to
five
just
minutes maybe.
yeah let people circle in. As you're coming in, kind of the plan for today is going to be to Will has been doing this like awesome deep dive into just the news and the research around housing, and so we're going to be going into that in just a couple of minutes. Welcome everyone. I'm seeing lots of faces that I recognize. Hello Zach.
Is there?
Hello one other, and Scott. Scott said his your cognitive enhancer is spice. I would love to try spice from Dune. Like that would be like if I could somehow get my hands on like, or maybe you mean like spice, like the synthetic weed. I don't want to judge you. You're, um, so Will, because we got a couple of minutes, can you tell me a little bit more about this influencer boat ride that you won?
So I ran a 5K here in Dallas, and then people are super friendly here. Like one, there are a lot of transplants, and two, I think, cultural thing, maybe. I don't know. People
Like
from the
Southern
Northeast, I
hospitality
think.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, I met some people from the Northeast who live here and are a little bit more skeptical of that. I guess it's just kind of a little bit more cynical towards the idea that it's genuine hospitality, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I made some friends after, and one of them being like the social media influencer girl who added us to a group chat where basically every other day, like weekdays and weekends, she's like inviting everybody to these big like events across Dallas. And I had two friends visiting in town from St. Louis here in Dallas this weekend, and I was like, and she invited us on this like yacht out in Lake Louisville, where there are like 50 people on the boat. And so I was like, hey, may as well. We get on the boat, and there's like there's like a videographer. There's I mean, it's just like I don't know. I looked at it as an anthropological experiment.
You were
I was just
like a
doing
British 19th
legwork.
century explorer, like
Yeah.
trying to like categorize them all. For
Yeah.
those of you who are coming in, we're just chatting to let some people arrive. And Will's telling me
But
about influencer boat that he got to go on this weekend with some friends.
yeah, it was just like I mean, every girl on the boat was just had their phone out. It was just constantly. There were no organic moments that I saw. So it was fun. I wish them all well. In the back of my head, I'm just like, when the music literally stops and when you put your phone down, like what is it that you've been escaping from?
Yeah.
Like what it
So
yeah,
suddenly reality reasserts itself and you're
yeah, what does that
forced to
look
like,
like? What does that feel like
yeah.
for you? Everybody has that like when the music stops, when you're no longer like in a social setting and you're alone at home, and the music stops, the proverbial music stops. It's like, what does your dose of reality look and feel like? I
Yeah.
had that question for everybody I saw on that boat. And I'm like, God forbid they have children. My goodness. Anyway, um,
Okay. You wanna jump into it? We got like
yeah,
14 people here. I think it might be fun. So
yeah. Let's kick it
I'll
off.
introduce it first. So
Hmm.
first off, welcome everyone. My name is Peter. If you guys don't know me, it looks like most of the people here are people I'm familiar with. We have today with us William Miller. You guys might know him also. Might have seen some of his bylines. We've recently hired him on here at Boyd to help us do some research and really deep dive. That's his background as like in doing intelligence research or like financial intelligence research. So he's an amazing addition to the team. We're really excited to have him along, and he's been producing these weekly roundups. So there was one last week, and then there was one that came out this Saturday. If you guys haven't had a chance to go check it out, I really highly suggest that you do. And the plan for this live today is to kind of have Will debrief me on the research that he's done, and hopefully debrief you guys as well. We're playing around with the right time that we want to do this. One of the discussions me and Will had earlier this morning was probably arranging these live streams for Saturday morning instead. And, to time it with the release of the live stream, the release of the roundup, and
Hmm.
hopefully make it as accessible to people as possible. So if there's times that you guys think are best, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're still figuring everything out. And then the one last thing I'm going to talk about before I kind of hand it over to Will is we have the essay contest is still open. It
Hmm.
closes October 31st. The top prize is $2,500. I really highly, highly, highly suggest that you guys take the time to write something. It's not the maximum words are 2,500. We're not expecting a whole book on housing. But really, we want to find who are the smartest people out there amongst y'all. Like that's really one of our top goals. So even if you don't end up winning the prize, I still think it's well worth your time. And I think in terms of dollars per applicant, we might be the best essay contest out there right now.
Yeah,
So
it seems compelling from that standpoint, as well as even if the 2,500 doesn't move the needle for you, um, there's also the opportunity to connect with Boyd, to make a trip out to DC,
yep,
to meet Jeff and Peter, and maybe I'm even there. I don't know. I live in
I
Dallas,
would hope
but
you would be there.
yeah,
You won't
that would
be.
be cool. Um, but to sort of connect with people who are talking about these things, and sort of, I like to think, like, at least in the Substack sphere, at the tip of the spear of like sort of figuring out new policy approaches, um and sort of raising certain issues.
Yeah, and Boyd is young, right? Like we were founded in 2023. This new sprint is brand new. We're only on week 3 of it, and so you really have huge space to contribute still.
Hmm.
In the future, like this is a way to get on the ground floor of something really cool and to show us
Yeah,
that you're talented and capable. Okay, handing it over to you, Will. You ready
yeah,
to debrief?
yeah. I was going to start just briefly on sort of the news flow.
Cool.
There's a ton of talk this week about mortgage rates, especially with the Fed meeting. The Fed did cut rates and short-term rates, which is the Fed funds rates, overnight lending rate between the Fed and member banks. Um, and so, yeah, like, we have seen mortgage rates come down over the past, let's say, past month or so. They're at year lows. The last time they were in this range was almost exactly a year ago. But that was a near term bottom. Um,
What
Lennar,
do you
the
what do you expect do you expect that to move housing in a substantial way or?
so so Lennar noted that despite lower mortgage rates, they have not seen a pickup in buyer demand. Rather, at these levels, the incremental sort of, what it has incrementally catalyzed is more so refinancings.
Right.
Um, this past week, applications to refinance were up 58% compared with the previous week, and 70% higher than the year over year. Whereas applications to purchase a home with a mortgage rose only 3% for the week, and we're 20% higher than a year ago. So that's not nothing, but we are seeing more refinancings than actual applications to purchase homes. And that could be the case for a number of different reasons. I think, I mean, no matter where you look or what source you're listening to, prices are still extremely prohibitive.
Yeah.
And so yeah, let me, this is not in, wasn't in the roundup, but I found it the other day. Um, and I do have a link to this. I don't know if it's a study or it's just a report by Fannie Mae. Um, but according to their calculations, it would take one of three things, or a combination of them, for affordability to return to 2016 through 2019 levels. One, the median price of a single family home would need to fall 38% to 257,000 from the current 414,000. Um, Two, the median household income would have to rise more than 60% to 134,000. Or three, the mortgage rate would need to fall to 2.35% from roughly 6.5%. It's around 6%, I want to say
So
now.
it's if any of those three things happen, we would get back to
Yeah,
kind of like okay.
yeah. And
So really,
that
it really is. So if I'm hearing this, the rates really seem to be driving most of the unaffordability versus 2016 to 2019.
I think it's a huge factor. There are other things that, especially whenever I get to the research, sort of, what the supply constraints are or what they're being driven from. The Glazer study is really like, um, as far as I see it, like every other finding that I've come across, sort of draws back to, not explicitly but implicitly, back to the findings of this Glazer study
If
called
you're
the
if you're listening along, by the way, the Glazier study is an academic paper by some economists that we're gonna get into later in this
Mhm.
call.
Yeah, Ed Glazer is like a prominent housing economist, and a lot of people who talk about housing and are involved in the space consider themselves either Glazer pilled or not Glazer pilled. And I would say I'm increasingly Glazer pilled. Um, but yeah, so one thing I did want to highlight is this common misconception on mortgage rates. Just like one or two more things on mortgage rates before we move on, is that is that one, you don't there's only a very loose link between short-term rates and mortgage rates. And when you hear about like yield curve dynamics, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's the fact that mortgage rates are typically, I mean, almost predominantly 30-year loans. They pretty closely track the 10-year treasury yield, and the difference between those is what is considered the MBS spread, mortgage-backed security spread, and that spread is wide right now. Historically speaking, it's pretty wide. I want to say it's like 250 basis points, 2.5%.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is that the Fed right now, who on their balance sheet houses a large amount of mortgage-backed securities, legacy MBS mortgage-backed securities from when they sort of helped soften the blow of the financial crisis, as well as in each ensuing round of quantitative easing, a large, significant portion of those QE programs were committed to purchasing MBS in the open market. Um, as we've seen quantitative tapering, which has been occurring for, I want to say, the last 12 to 18 months, which falls under the umbrella of Fed tightening.
Yeah.
The MBS roll off, which averages 18 billion each month, um, what they could do to shrink the MBS spread basically is reinvest the roll off. So when an
Let me walk you
MBS.
back just one
Mhm.
second quickly. Why does the spread between the mortgage-backed securities that the Fed holds and I guess like the 10-year treasury bond, like why does that matter? Like why is that relevant to home prices?
Because, well, for one, I mean the spread in absolute terms increases the unaffordability of housing, right?
Okay.
If the spread were to tighten, housing would unequivocally be more affordable. So that matters. That's significant. And when we're talking about like monetary policy implications of the current housing, of housing unaffordability, I mean that's like really the most obvious sort of conduit there is you, you hear the term yield curve control by the Fed. And that sort of harkens back to the ability for the Fed to influence fiscal debt and deficit concerns when it comes to like housing affordability concerns in the same exact ways they can practice yield curve control here by potentially repurchasing as they roll off sort of uh, mortgage-backed securities that are expiring, for lack of a better word, that are maturing. They could reinvest those proceeds into new mortgage-backed securities, and what that would do would increase the price of mortgages as which is inversely related to mortgage rates, just like a
So,
bond.
okay, just to make sure I'm on the same page as you, is
Mhm.
as these mortgages like time out, the Fed can like basically subsidize the mortgage market, continue to subsidize the mortgage market, and as a result, they
Yeah.
would drive down the cost of capital for home buyers.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And it would like make no mistake that would amount to Fed easing.
Yeah.
It's just that so often, I'll just sort of come back to like my original point. And so often we only think about like where the Fed funds rate is,
Yeah.
and sort of like wrap all of monetary policy into that one tool, when in reality the Fed has like three or four prominent tools for carrying out monetary policy. And this is one of the like this is, as far as I see, like a way for the Fed to have like a targeted uh, sort of like to target some sort of like downstream policy implications.
Okay.
Now it's a whole entirely different discussion as to whether that falls under their dual mandate. And in the same way that some people might say that the Fed worrying about climate change or racial equality or those types of things is policy creep or mission creep, you can make the case that this is that as well. However, yeah, we won't we won't
That
dovetail into that.
topic for another day. It's an
Yes.
interesting one, but okay. So
Mhm.
in the news, the rates were dropped. It doesn't look like it affected new purchasing very much. It
Not
does look
yet.
like it moved refinancing. And
Mhm.
then there's these other, I'm just summarizing in case,
Yeah.
but it does, the Fed has other tools that they have yet to activate that they could
Mhm.
use to decrease the cost of capital for home buyers. Was there anything else in the news you thought was like important
Well,
to highlight?
the I think politically, like the SB 79 bill in California,
Yeah.
um, is real. It feels like an inflection point, especially given that I think Gavin Newsom. Um, Now the bill still needs to cross his desk and he needs to sign it. It's been passed, I think, legislatively. Um, I think this sort of marks a uh, like an abundance pilling of
Yeah.
California Democrats and
Yeah.
hopefully other coastal Democrats. Yimby pilling, however you want to
And
think about it.
just for people who are stopping in, the bill that Will is talking about was
Mhm.
California legislation that basically removed a lot of requirements around building high density construction near public transit stations. So it was this like generally trying to open the construction market in California and the housing market in California to more like YIMBY policies. So just I just
So
wanted to give some context. That's the bill he's talking about.
yeah, like multifamily high-rise apartments right next to transit, which I heard about this one. This has been studied basically. It's like so if usually like public transit has like this these like I can't remember the exact term, but basically as more people use it, it becomes better. Whereas like so many different metros are centered around the notion that everybody has a car, but the difference there is like as more people use the interstate system or the road system, it becomes more congested and more difficult to use. And so if people live close in proximity to these public transportation uh, technologies, if you will, they actually they actually become better. They have
Yeah.
there's I can't remember
But
the
there's this idea
nomenclature,
like
but
it's
there's like
basically like a
a different
positive
type of
feedback loop.
economies of scale there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's like really important. And I hope I've flagged a few studies for this coming week, that talk about, I mean, transportation and public transit and those sorts of things are like a crucial consideration for solving like for solving the problem that happens when you increase housing supply in high density areas, um, which is one of, um, a valid and prominent argument among NIMBYs is that, if we build more here, we'll become inundated, congested, etc.
And so the California bill tying it to like explicitly to public transit is in your
Hmm.
minds kind of like a watershed moment
Yeah,
where
I think so.
it's like very positive policy development in a state that has had, I think it's fair to characterize as like very suboptimal policy. So maybe this
Yes.
is like a direction to improve, like something positive, right? Like there's a strong negativity bias, but this is like
Hmm.
good signs that things could be improving.
Yes. California has a long way to go in terms of like the environmental review process and all of these like basically additional uh, costs that are baked into building housing. And this is a good, I guess, segue into the
Some of the
research.
research. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we have is basically like, from what I've read and heard, like three like core ideas happening here. The the most core thing is like price above production cost problem in housing, which refers to like the structural disconnect between what it costs to build a home, and what people can actually afford, or more precisely, what the market clears at. And I'm reading off notes here, but I
Sure.
want, I want to like be precise here. In a competitive market, prices should generally hover not too far above marginal production costs, and that would include materials, labor, land, permitting, financing. You could sort of take like a building blocks approach to like deconstructing a house, like the price of a property, right? So it'd be like the production cost, but also like in places like California and some places on the East Coast, like the permitting block is disproportionately higher, or like
Yeah.
comprises more of the price of a home or a property than in other places. So prices are persistently higher than construction costs in many regions, and it's not just cyclical; it's structural. Um, and so I guess I'll this is a good time to sort of
I think this is also a good time to tie into exactly before you 1 second. Scott
mhm,
McWilliams commented, definitely seems like a good step, but it's going to take a lot to get people back from the suburbs and the exurbs. This is exactly kind of like I think what you're talking about with the persistently higher construction costs in some of these places is part of the problem, right? Like it
mhm,
it's there's not just like one obvious silver bullet. Like there's a lot of things that need to change to get like to solve like what you're identifying is like the structural issue where homes are
mhm.
consistently more expensive than it would cost for them to build more houses.
Yeah, and it's not just occurring in like the urban cores. What the Glazer study, I mean, the title of it is America's Housing Supply Problem: The Closing of the Suburban Frontier question mark. And what they found was that this missing homes counterfactual, if 2000 to 2020 home building had matched 1980 to 2000 rates, the US would have roughly 15 million more units today. So
Which
it's
is
just like a basic.
crazy. Which is
Mhm,
crazy when you think that in 2000 to 2020, we experienced much higher migration rates than 1980 to
mhm,
2000, right? So it's like not only are we below construction levels that we would expected given consistent construction rates, but we're actually like even more below, I think, where you would want to be in like a more like positive equilibrium where
mhm.
we've had like higher in migration, especially internally to some of these like very high demand places.
Yeah, yeah, and they make a point of like basically raising the point that this problem occurred far before the work from home phenomenon hit or anything like that. Um, one of the things that they flagged was that that a lot of like people in the construction, like a lot of laborers in the home building construction market left that field in the wake of the great financial crisis. Um, so basically, I mean, the findings of the study is that the price to construction relationship is much weaker now than it used to be. And in technical terms, it's like a flattening of the supply curve. Um, and and so if you think about it in terms of like supply elasticity to price, that that relationship has broken down and gone negative even in LA. They studied six major markets. In Los Angeles, that relationship has actually gone negative, meaning that um, there's less building
The
where there are
most
higher
demand
prices.
places.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where there's most demand and where uh, prices exceed cost the most, which is a crazy phenomenon.
An insane phenomenon, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that, there's this I don't know, that's just insane because it's not I can't remember if it's this research paper or another one that you linked, but, there's one where it's not just at the city level, it's in the neighborhood level also.
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
there's,
Um,
it's like both we have the least construction in the most in-demand cities, and then also within those cities, we have the least construction in the most in-demand, like, parts of the city.
mhm.
Um,
And there, like I said, this study is extremely YIMBY pilled. I'll just read off of like sort of the conclusion, and this is a direct quote from the paper. Um, To us, this suggests the American housing markets increasingly follow the model put forth by Manker Olson, 1982. In his view, insiders increasingly use regulations to protect their own rents and keep outsiders out. If existing homeowners in high price areas have become better at controlling land use regulations and stopping new construction, then we should expect to see a decreasing link between high prices and new construction, which is exactly what the data shows.
yeah.
Now, this brings up like um, two significant sort of hypotheses or theories. One being the home voter hypothesis, which says that that basically you could think of like you could think of homeowners in a certain neighborhood or area being like stockholders in a corporation who seek to maximize the value of their shares.
And so that
Um,
they want it's like in a classic corporate finance model, they don't want to dilute their ownership of this, like, valuable
exactly.
asset, and so
Yeah.
they don't wanna include new shareholders. So even if, like, the entity, like, the community is acting in, like, a positive sum dimension towards its current shareholders, it could be, like, exclusionary towards the inclusion of new shareholders, which are seen as, like, diluting it.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, and so homeowners, yeah, they lobby against new housing supply if they perceive it as a threat to neighborhood quality, school crowding, or property values.
And
And then there's
this is
this
yeah, go ahead, yeah. Sorry.
this like political feedback loop as well, because local officials who are elected by the same homeowners respond by restricting development through zoning, height limits, lengthy permitting. There's a whole host of issues, which are a lot of like the leading like you know institutions and organizations that are like proposing new policies. They're actually defining these things like in explicit language, which I think is a significant step. It's not just
Yeah.
like this ambiguous like you know regulation versus deregulation paradigm. Like they're drilling down and defining these things. A big one in Dallas, like which is in a state where there are very few building regulations. However, locally in certain markets like Dallas, minimum lot size is a huge impediment to sort of you know ease of building. But there's a number of other ones. It's like sort of these structural requirements. You need to have a certain amount of staircases, uh, per square foot. Um, and so these are all like fall under the umbrella of zoning, right? Um, and then there's also this idea of so you have the home voter hypothesis, and you also have this fiscal zoning idea, which is that local governments use zoning not just to regulate land use, but also as a fiscal tool to manage their tax base. And so you have basically this dynamic where municipalities prefer land uses that generate high property tax revenue with low service costs. And what this amounts to is basically single family building, like being incentivized, where it's large lot single family homes and commercial properties that don't sort of inundate other people. Like it doesn't have this like downstream impact of higher congestion or anything like that. So it's low
And
service cost,
there's
high.
also probably it's like a way of selecting either residents. Like if there's some
hundred
concern, if
percent
there's like
that too.
concern over like things like crime or educational quality or something like that.
Hmm.
Like for example, I just saw this comment from Scott McWilliams again, which was like, I'm in a town outside of Twin Cities, and I definitely see a lot of this. Lots of complaints about McMansions. Definitely a transition period from the original residents live, where commercial
Hmm.
centers could make their town. And like I don't know if this is exactly the point that he's making, but it kind of to your point about like kind of like tax-based management, you're also managing all the characteristics of your community. And because you can only do price discrimination,
Hmm.
making sure it's only very expensive like homes that are built is one way to to do that, right? Like
Yeah, yeah. So like you could think about it this way as well. It's like I'm looking across the street. There's a sort of a lot that's just filled with trees and grass. That dirt costs probably 10 times per square foot the the dirt 50 miles away from here. Now, a way to get around that problem is to put a bunch of steel and wood and all kinds of different materials and build up. To but so the restriction there on zoning, et cetera, is what like allows that those sort of uh, disequilibriums to persist, right?
yeah,
Um,
cool. Is
and
there anything
so
else in the sorry,
yeah, yeah. Well, just one more thing on like fiscal zoning. So they avoid or restrict housing types that may bring in lower tax revenue or higher public expenditures. Multifamily units that bring more children needing schools, uh, and so on and so forth. And so like I just described, this is like it creates this like price cost wedge.
yeah,
Um, Even if construction costs would make lower cost housing feasible, fiscal zoning prevents such developments. The result is artificial scarcity.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Um, so this all kind of harkens back to the collective action problem, um, and it explains the political demand for restrictive zoning. Um,
It's
and
interesting
the
because it's one where I think California is actually ironically pretty well suited to solve because they
Mhm.
have like a strong. I mean, my mental model of this is that having lived in California is that it truly does seem like rent seeking from homeowners versus fear of
a
like
hundred
layoffs.
percent.
So somewhere like St. Louis seems like a lot of these restrictions would exist because you want to like keep people out of your community. Whereas in
Mhm.
California, I don't anecdotally I don't think that that's a problem. Like I think if you built like a big apartment building, you just have a ton of like high income CS people move into it. And so maybe in California the approach is going to turn out to be very successful. I mean, the YIMBY approach, like this kind of
Mhm.
abundance approach, is going to turn out to be very successful, simply because like there's very few downsides from like a community level to building homes, and I could see it
Yeah.
being different in a state like Texas. Like this is one of the things that me and Will have routinely come across is that when you look at housing in this country, it's so hard to compare apples and oranges. Like the
Yeah, it's
dynamics that, yeah,
housing is like a house is not a fungible uh yeah, economic item. It's not a
yeah,
commodity that can be traded on multiple markets. Like a California house is not a West Virginia house, is not a Dallas house. It's just so yeah, it, like every study that I've seen, it always like starts at sort of the macro or meta level, and it invariably like drills down to certain like case studies of certain markets.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
mhm. And one more thing on the Glazer study is really interesting takeaway for me at least was that they find this let's call it like um, price cost discrepancy persists most prominently in areas where the locals have higher educational attainment. And their, I guess their theory on that is that the, more highly educated people tend to be more politically engaged.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, one second. Before we go on to the next one,
Yep.
there were two comments that I want to just get to. So Scott Rowe said network effects, real cost, transportation, utility services impact feasibility of rural and suburban development as well. The cost
Hmm.
of suburban's fall should be reflected in prices and taxes. So there's like a taxing externality story there. I know Will is also very into these, like they're called like MUDs in Texas. Like they're
I'm mud pilled. Yes.
and it's
Um,
kind of like a, if you want to explain a little bit what that means.
yeah, just at like a surface level, basically you have these, it's a financing structure, and it's like a constitutional thing in Texas that allows for it. I'm not a legal expert, but it's worth looking into exactly what that is. But in terms of like how replicable it is in other states, I'm not sure. But basically, you have these like communities of home purchasers that come together, and they create new revenue bonds uh, for for like the development of communities, and basically for the extent of these bonds that are issued to fund the building. um, they they mature after 30 years, and after that period the local tax levies roll off. And so after a certain point, these communities, they're just, and granted, like Dallas and Texas in general has a lot of flat land, flat barren land that makes it a lot easier to do these sorts of things. Not only that, it has a lot of immigrants. It's a large immigrant population, which over-indexes to supply of home building labor. Um, and so basically, I mean, MUDs have been around for, I want to say, since the 70s or 80s, and like around Dallas, there's just every year you see new cities, new municipalities just popping up, and what these bonds do is like they fund. They're called municipal utility districts. They fund the water supply, they fund transportation, and everything that's necessary to have like uh, you know
Like a little
a,
city up here in the middle
a
of
well
nowhere.
functioning, yeah, suburban
Yeah.
enclave.
And honestly, that
Um,
doesn't address part of what Scott, I think, is talking about, which are these externalities they would impose on the like city center. But this is like a mechanism to try to like maybe internalize some of those like utility costs to the people who are actually
mhm.
purchasing the home.
There there is political pushback on it here, especially from the surrounding uh, areas, the surrounding communities, because what you've seen is some of those communities lose part of they see out migration to the new developing areas, and so that's a drag on their tax revenues, if nothing else. Not only that, but like there's a finite water supply, and
Yeah.
so that's a huge political consideration.
And I just want to address this one last question and we can move on if that's okay with
Hmm.
you. And then lots of moving is because of schools, at least for by us. So
Hmm.
it's not really economic discrimination, but a lack of school choice is driving migration. I totally agree with this. I think that like, if people had more agency over where their kids were able to go to school, then they
Hmm.
would be less defensive of, like building out in their local communities or something like that. And it would also just
Totally.
make everything easier. So
I
if
can't
that's the point you're
remember.
making, I totally agree.
I can't remember where I heard this. I don't know if it was you and I talking, Peter, but I was I was having like it was a really really good conversation this past week, and someone brought up, and I can't even remember where this was the case, but that school choice, like there were basically like zero restrictions in a certain area
Mhm.
where you didn't have to live in a certain within a certain region and choose the school within that region. That there were like zero restrictions, and that alleviated a lot of I guess the
Like
mobility
anxiety
restrictions.
and mobility and stuff. It was not me, but
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. You want to move on to the
We're
next
taking into.
paper?
Yeah. So the Rhode Island Island Survey Initiative, this made some waves on Twitter, on Yimby Twitter, and it's just fascinating. Just if you click on the link, there's a lot of good graphics that really display it. But basically, it's just like support was strongest when the question was about Rhode Island as a whole. So
Yeah.
people just thinking sort of um, in general, between 73% and 81% said they supported every type of housing. So people understand that we need more housing supply. That is sort of the one shot.
But just not
Uh,
in my neighborhood.
yes, but
Yeah.
yeah. So for example, 42% said they would support new single family market rate homes in their own neighborhood. But whenever you started getting more into like the affordable territory, 21% supported public housing and 17% supported homeless shelters nearby.
But like, not to keep
Um,
pounding my own drum, like I would not support a homeless shelter nearby.
no, I
Like
same,
I'm
but
almost as like EMB pilled as possible. But like
yeah,
if Virginia was like, we're gonna build a homeless shelter in your neighborhood, I would probably get a sign and go protest. Like I don't want that.
yeah, yeah, no, totally. It's understandable. It's pretty obvious um, that hardly anybody would say. I mean, you really have to be just
I guess like
like to our
principles.
earlier point, like principally against your own interest
Yeah.
to support a homeless shelter nearby. Um,
Which I mean, this is a tough nut to crack, right?
mhm,
I thought one of the things that was really interesting from this was that there's a lot more support for kind of like, you could say, not for profit. So whether this is like public private partnership or
mhm,
just explicitly nonprofits doing the building, versus private developers. So just to give some context, 66% of people supported nonprofits taking the initiative on this. 54% of people supported it being a public private partnership where the government builds the homes and sells them at market rates. And only 41% support a partnership with private developers. So there is like this like, and this exists everywhere. There's like a consistent anti-capitalist undertone to a lot of the
mhm.
housing discussion. Um,
Yeah, the developer industry is like highly demonized um, for some reason. I mean, there's obvious reasons. I mean, um, they were the source of a lot of pain during the Great Financial Crisis,
yeah.
um, and they do have. I mean, like home builder margins are pretty wide. Um,
That's not
they're
necessarily their fault, their fault, given what you're saying about the Glacier paper, right? Where it could be that there's just these like structural frictions that mean that then when you're actually able to build the house, the
yeah,
margins
and
are huge.
they can choose certain markets um, that sort of optimize those margins. Lennar's earnings call last week, I read through about half of it. Um, they highlighted a lot of pain in the housing market uh, at present. They missed their numbers, and one of the most important things that investors look at is margins. Their margins have come down from the 30% range in the last few years to currently in the high teens, because the main reason they flagged was that they're having to sort of to implement incentives and discounts to actually complete those sales and move on to the next development. Um, yeah, uh, and so they've taken down their expectations for new homes built out this year. Um, they didn't they didn't cite labor or they didn't cite tariffs. Material costs have actually come down. Lumber prices are down a lot in the past few months.
It is politically risky to talk about tariffs, though, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the lack of
yes,
talking about it is not surprising necessarily.
yes,
Um,
yes.
okay.
You don't want a Trump tweet
No,
name
that's
dropping your
bad.
company in a bad light. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're a company people don't like already. Okay, so then
Hmm.
if we want to be a little bit more positive, the housing policy blueprint Texas 36
Hmm.
looked, from my perspective, as someone who doesn't own a home, more positive. So do you want to break that down a little bit?
It's compelling. They talked a lot about the Houston market. Houston is a fascinating one. There are basically zero zoning restrictions, and I met someone a few weeks ago, just at a social gathering that works in construction here in Dallas, but is from Houston. And and if you've ever been to Houston, like you will have a neighborhood next to a fucking like gas refinery, and the whole area just smells like shit. But that's life, and
Yeah,
people sort of get over it. They're like, yeah, the Port of Houston is a huge economic driver here,
yeah.
and it's like the refinery capital of the world. So that's just something, and half the population basically works at the port or for those refineries in one way or another, or they work in finance, which is upstream of those physical assets. And um, I haven't talked about the study yet, but one of the interesting things that the guy I talked to mentioned was that there's just so much damn concrete at this point in Houston that like where they're able to build on top of floodplains,
Hmm.
um, where so Hurricane Harvey and other like small time sort of like pockets of rain turn into can become catastrophic because
Hmm.
it's all just sort of just flooding on concrete. Um, but at any rate, so this study was really interesting, um, and they noted that markets like Austin have experienced like significant year-over-year declines in rents. And basically, I mean, the gist is like it's no wonder given that Austin has built out so many multifamily projects and so much capacity, like
Yeah, one of the
apartment
lines
capacity.
was a
Yeah,
37% increase in inventory from pre-pandemic levels, which is
and
which
it's
is crazy.
pretty remarkable. Um, this I found really, really interesting. The paper from which the Financial Times derived their chart found that while most people, both renters and homeowners, want housing prices in their city to decline, only 30 to 40% believe that a higher supply would lead to this outcome. This skepticism towards supply and demand principle in housing starkly contrasts with respondents' otherwise accurate understanding of other markets. Instead, for housing, there's a strong, stable, folk economic belief blaming high prices on landlords and developers. Um, and
I
then,
wonder I wonder why. Like, I would be fascinated to see. This would be something that would be interesting to look into maybe this week, is like kind of like what are the psychological reasons that people
mhm,
for this setting in particular seem to take, by American standards, like relatively, uncapitalist positions, right? Like what is it? Yeah.
it almost feels like blaming Goldman Sachs for the entire financial crisis and or
Yeah.
something like along those lines. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. It's worth seeing if there's any like deep dives or studies on it.
Do you know if
Um,
this 30 or 40% are people in Texas, or is it nationally? Because I would be also interested to see if like how people have been exposed to reality adjust this, right? Because I could easily see someone in California forming this where they like, because it's like in a situation like California, the shortage is so enormous that you could probably build new housing, and in a short term perspective, it probably wouldn't change houses very much. But if you live in Austin, it seems like you would almost like have to believe that more supply would lower housing. So do you know if the 30-40% is nationally or the
I'm
locally?
not sure. They cited a Financial Times chart, which
Yeah,
I'm not
I'll
sure
look
what
into
the
it.
source of that chart was, but there's definitely more detail if you click on the link to the study.
Cool.
And it would be nice to find that Financial Times chart as well. So I'm not sure.
And for people who are
Um,
joining us, by the way, we're going over the weekly roundup that
mhm.
Will wrote and published on Saturday. So all of the links and all the stuff we're talking about is in there as well. And so you guys should go check it out and link it.
Yeah, and so they this Texas 2036 housing policy blueprint. They drilled down to a specific market, the Houston market, saying that it provides an excellent test case for how lowering minimum lot sizes allows for the construction of homes responsive to market demands. And this draws back to the Glazer study, where there's just been this noticeable uh, unresponsiveness to market demands in terms of like supply of housing. So beginning in the 1990s, Houston lowered its minimum lot sizes, in some cases to a mere 1,400 square feet, first in the city's urban core and later expanding to the entire city. Allowing the subdivision of larger lots has led to the development of tens of thousands of distinctive Houston-style townhomes. And if you go there, you know exactly what they're talking about. And they have a bunch of pictures in this report. Tall, skinny, single-family housing units that are often the most affordable housing option in Houston's most desirable neighborhoods. Um, uh, there's this study, an article in a scholarly journal called "Here Come the Tall, Skinny Houses: Assessing Single-Family to Townhouse Redevelopment in Houston." That these townhomes are usually built on previously non-residential parcels within the urban core at a median assessed value, approximately 60% of that of the median home on a non-subdivided lot. So it's like
Hmm.
direct evidence that like upzoning, that like lowering minimum lot size requirements and lowering these land use regulations directly leads to more affordable
Yeah.
uh, new housing developments.
And not only is
Um,
it cheaper, but it's brand new modern housing, right? So it's going to
yeah,
have all the
it's
amenities that,
in desirable areas. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Um, the article's authors summarize the reforms succinctly by saying there can be a robust supply response provided that market conditions are ripe and the new land use regulations allow for the construction of a product that builders want to build and that home buyers want to buy.
Mhm.
Um, and so it speaks for itself, I think, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then yeah, if anybody, so we have 36 people in here. If anybody has any comments on that, I think increasingly as we're going through this, we're just seeing that, like, yes, indeed, like more building would lead to home lower prices, and that regulations and land use regulations, minimum lot sizes, zoning requirements in general, um, are huge impediments to building in urban areas and even suburban.
So one second,
Um,
Scott McWilliams had a
mhm.
comment, which was, "We have tons of disconnected townhouses around us. There's still about 2,000 square feet. Super strange. Might be because of the family aspect, but taking up 50% more space than necessary."
And Scott said he was in Minneapolis. Is that right?
Yeah. So disconnected townhouses. I'm almost like imagining the like eldritch horrors that would create that. This is like I guess there's a house, like a townhouse, but like they space them out a
But
little bit.
2,000 square feet for a townhouse is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank
Yeah,
you for sharing. That's very interesting.
yeah. Um,
The one thing you had another paper about that you included in here about the international transactions in
mhm.
U.S. residential real estate. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I thought it was one of the most interesting things about here was that I thought that I'm trying to find it. where it was. Here it was. Measured by the number of homes purchased, China returned to the top country of origin among foreign buyers during April of 2024 to March 2025, accounting for 15% of home purchased by foreign buyers. But this is what I found really fascinating, which is Chinese buyers continue to have the highest average purchase price at 1.2 million as buyers purchased in population centers in more expensive states. And so it's interesting because when we think about the way international buyers affect markets, um, they a lot of them come in with huge amounts of money, right? They're using this
Hmm.
as like a mechanism to basically launder is a very
To
negative word, but
save
to
to
like
save
move
their
money.
money,
Yeah.
to invest their money. They're especially in China. They're like, as an investor, even if you're local, you don't have near the same protections on your capital, legal protections, recourse if things go awry, as you do in the United States. And that's one of
And
the,
so,
yeah.
these people aren't competing. If someone is coming in, they're trying to move money into the United States. That's the purpose of doing this. It can have, in my opinion, I haven't seen academic papers, but it can have these pretty distortionary effects on prices because they're not purchasing them for like the reason a person who would want to live in the community might. And so they're not
Yeah.
looking like they would be willing to pay any price. They're interested in buying very expensive assets because that's like the purpose of it. It's not
Hmm.
exclusively as a place to live.
And there's much to be said um, about people coming into the market and buying homes as an investment, not
Yeah.
for like, uh, you know, for residential purposes. Um, one of the studies that we're going to highlight in this upcoming week is a study on institutional entrance to like single family housing markets. It's been especially prominent in like Atlanta, um, for a number of reasons, but uh, the study that I saw, and hopefully there's some more that I can look through this week, um, was actually like, it's unsavory to think about BlackRock sort of coming in and just because they have access to cheaper capital, sort of scaling up and owning all the homes on a street. But in fact, this study found that it doesn't actually drive up housing costs. In fact, it may stabilize housing costs and lower them, and that it just so happens that they are perhaps better at identifying growth markets. So
And this is,
their purchases tend to correlate with regions that are already growing.
I mean, I think that
Um,
this is like the core dynamic of housing, in my opinion, is that what we mean also changes so much, right? Like what we mean by housing affordability. Because it's like, I almost,
mhm,
in my mind, BlackRock buying all the homes in America, but lowering costs by 5% is a catastrophe. Like, I mean, personally for myself, I would not want that. Like, I think home ownership is important. Um, but it also would make a ton of sense that these big companies would probably not only have better cost of capital and, they could have better contracting negotiations and stuff like
mhm.
that, but also that they probably would break up kind of like this rent seeking community aspect.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that the study talked about was their ability to, like, they have the legal resources to carry out appeals,
Yeah.
um, to much greater effect than individual home buyers or like small scale real estate investors do. So they have substantial resources to provide pushback on.
To like to fight the legal battle,
Yeah.
um, which is like positive and negative sides to it, obviously, right?
Hmm.
Like everything is a series of trade offs.
Yeah, we've got quite a few
Comments, yeah. So
comment. Yeah.
one of the ones I saw that I wanted to highlight was one other said, "I'm excited to argue against all the NIMBY stuff in my submissions. Going to be so much fun." I want to say like this is where me and Will's bias kind of rests with like kind of like market forces. I'm very interested in anyone's asymmetric solution. So if you're listening to what you're saying, you're like, I think they've got this wrong. The essay contest is a place to take your time to articulate
Hmm.
why you think we're stupid. And then taxes on investment properties can fund housing solutions. I mean that would be interesting, like to maybe treat like people who purchase homes for investment differently from a tax perspective or something like that.
Yeah,
I,
there's a
I think we already have a
the
little bit of that, but we could do
the
more.
state. This is in the roundup. The State of the Nation's Housing 2025 by the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard. I'll just go ahead. It's just a small excerpt. According to Cotality, investors brought nearly a third of single-family homes sold in the first quarter of 2025, 31%, much higher than the 19% purchased in the same quarter of 2019. Individuals struggle to compete with large investors that can buy homes with cash or more easily secure financing, closing deals quickly, and purchase several properties in a single transaction. Such investors target modestly priced homes and have been especially active in growing Sunbelt markets. In response, lawmakers across several states have proposed legislation to prioritize sales to individuals. So, yeah, that seems like uh, something that we're going to hear a lot more on from a policy standpoint. Um, I would so Peter and I have like tossed around the idea of getting people on here to interview, and Joshua Coven, assistant professor of real estate at Baruch College, uh, who just got his PhD from NYU in 2025, and he was who did who wrote the paper titled "The Impact of Institutional Investors on Home Ownership and Neighborhood Access," and he actually had like a sort of contrarian conclusion, which is that institutional investors can be good for affordability. Like I just described, like it would be awesome to have him to speak with him and see what he would have to say um, about any proposed legislation or how that you know what his views are on that.
So we just crossed the hour mark. I want to
Hmm.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Is there last couple of things you want to go over before we wrap up the live stream?
No, maybe there's a few other comments. I'll just read some out. I wonder. So Scott McWilliams, I wonder if beyond the great financial crisis distrust, there's some expectation of a higher quality when there is no specific profit motive and direct requirements. I don't think that matches how government building works, but I could see why people see it this way. They have direct requirements. Well, I'm not sure exactly what he means.
I think he's saying, if I understood it correctly, is it's if there's not the necessity to make a profit margin, you could in theory put that money into like making the house better.
Oh, right,
And
right.
so
So that's the
people
idea of.
could like be forming basically this idea that like the homes are inferior quality. Because if I'm paying $200,000 for a
Mhm,
home, but I know a third of that is going in profit to the developer, then
mhm.
I could be
Yeah,
just getting
there's
an inferior home.
the idea of like nationalizing is a strong word, but like having state-run home builders. Um, that is there's a large contingency of people who think that would be a good solution. I don't think we've really seen that. I mean, you've seen like sort of housing projects over time and throughout the country, but having actual like state-run or state subsidized home builders who only seek to break even, basically, um, it's worth
And
looking
then
into.
and then Aaron said, "Have you heard anything about how Houston's plan? Have you heard anything about Houston's plan to handle stormwater?"
Yeah, no, I haven't. Um, yeah, it's worth looking into for sure.
Yeah. And then Scott said, "That's exactly what I mean. I don't think the government would be better at building, but I could see why some people think that." So I'm personally public housing build. Like I think this might be a place that me and Will disagree. I think the problem with public housing, as I see it, is mostly composed that like it becomes these intense concentrations of poverty, unless that the government is incapable of building homes. I'm biased by this because I grew up in I spent my early childhood in a house that was built in the 1940s as public housing. So it's like it was no longer public housing when I lived there. But I'm personally a little public housing pilled. I know countries like Singapore and Sweden have done them well. Um, Okay. I think those are all the comments that I saw. Wait one second. There's
Hmm.
another one by Scott. Substandard housing may be a bigger problem than homelessness. Um, Potentially, definitely could see that. Is there any last
Hmm.
things you want to talk about, and then I'll go over the agenda for this week, and then we can wrap it up.
Nothing here. Yeah,
Nothing
I think
here?
we covered everything pretty well.
Awesome. Awesome. And
Hmm.
thank you everyone for stopping
Yeah.
by. Okay. So the last thing I'll say is we this Wednesday I'm going to have a history of housing costs essay coming out, where I kind of look at the way that they have changed, home prices have changed over time, in particular across the United States. On Friday, I have another article coming out that is yet to be announced. It will definitely be coming out, but I don't want to give the title away until I'm sure it's all good. And then this coming Saturday, we're gonna have another weekly roundup. So just make sure to stay tuned because there's lots of really good research in there. And we'll probably be moving the housing debrief to Saturday morning as well, and
Hmm.
see how that looks. So this has been really fun, Will. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise. Thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you so
And
much.
we'll see you next time.
Yeah, bye.
See ya.